At 58, I learned that a life can fall apart without making much noise. No glass shattered, no one screamed. There was just one conversation, one look on my husband's face, and one sentence that divided my life into before and after. He told me he was leaving, not for space, not for time, for good. I remember staring at him, waiting for the rest of the explanation, as if more words might make betrayal feel smaller. But some truths do not soften when you add detail. They just sit there and change the air in the room. My name is Linda, and I was 58 years old when I realized I had built my whole adult life around a man who had already decided to continue without me. By the time he walked out, he was not the only thing I had lost. Looking back now, I can admit the marriage had been fading for years, but there is a difference between struggling and ending, and I lived inside that difference for a long time. We had become quieter with each other. Meals were shorter. Conversations were practical. Affection became something we performed in public and forgot in private. Still, I believed we were going through a hard season, not approaching the edge of collapse. That is what women like me do. We explain away distance because the alternative is too terrifying to hold. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself marriage changes after decades. I told myself every long relationship becomes less romantic and more functional. What I did not tell myself was the truth. I had started confusing endurance with security, and by the time I understood that, the foundation underneath me was already giving way. People think the deepest pain is being left. Sometimes it is, but what shocked me most was how much disappeared with him. He did not just take his clothes and his habits and his half of the bed. He took the version of life I had spent 30 years protecting. He took routines, shared history, future plans I had never even said out loud because I assumed they were safe. Then came the financial truth. Debt I did not fully understand. Accounts more fragile than I had believed. Bills that suddenly looked larger because I was now facing them alone. I had spent years thinking we were stable, only to realize stability had been more illusion than fact. It is a terrible thing to discover in your late 50s, that your marriage was weaker than you knew and your finances were thinner than you thought. I did not just lose a person. I lost the map I had been living by. No one talks enough about the shame of starting over late in life. People call you strong because they do not know what else to say. But strength is not what I felt in those first months. I felt embarrassed, exposed, smaller than I had ever felt in my adult life. I hated explaining anything. I hated when people asked, "How are you holding up?" because I knew they were trying to be kind, and I also knew I was one honest answer away from crying in public. I felt ashamed that my marriage had failed, ashamed that I had not seen the financial cracks sooner, ashamed that at 58 I was suddenly learning things I thought grown women were supposed to already know. The hardest part was this. I had spent years being dependable for everyone else, and now I was the woman whose life had broken open. I did not know how to wear that without feeling humiliated. The day I packed up the house, I learned how grief hides inside ordinary objects: towels, coffee mugs, picture frames, a lamp you once bought together and never really liked. I stood in my bedroom holding a winter sweater and started crying because it still smelled faintly like the life I thought I had. In the end, I packed everything important into a few boxes and realized how little of a long marriage actually belongs to just one person. Some things were clearly mine. Some were clearly his. but most of it felt haunted by shared use and broken meaning. I remember carrying boxes to my car and feeling as though the neighbors could see my failure stacked in cardboard. When I drove away, I did not feel free. I felt untethered. Starting over sounds brave when people say it from a distance. Up close, it looks like loading your life into a trunk and trying not to break down at red lights. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. One bedroom, thin walls, a kitchen so narrow I could touch both counters without taking a full step. I had never imagined living like that at my age, not because I thought I was above it, but because I thought that chapter of instability was behind me. The first night there, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the refrigerator hum in the dark. I had one lamp, 2 sets of towels, and more silence than I knew what to do with. But something else lived there too, though I could not name it yet. Relief. Not joy, not peace, just the quiet relief of no longer pretending. There was no one to disappoint, no one to wait up for, no one to keep explaining away. My life had become painfully small, but at least it was honest. And honesty, I would learn, can become the first brick in a new foundation. Starting over at 58 is not inspiring in the beginning. It is paperwork, budgeting, cheap groceries, and pretending you are not scared every time an unexpected bill arrives. I learned how much things cost when no one else is paying half. I learned how to open accounts, ask harder questions, read the fine print, and stop assuming someone else had everything under control. But I also learned quieter things. I learned I could eat dinner alone without feeling pathetic. I learned I could fix small things myself. I learned that loneliness and peace can sit at the same table for a while before one of them finally leaves. Slowly, the panic softened, not because life became easy, but because I was no longer as helpless as I had feared. Every small thing I handled on my own gave me back a piece of myself. Confidence did not return all at once. It came back in receipts, routines, and ordinary decisions. One of the hardest truths I faced during that time had nothing to do with my husband. It had to do with me. I realized I had spent most of my adult life being useful to everyone except myself. I had been a wife, a mother, a problem solver, a peacekeeper, a woman who absorbed stress before it reached anyone else. I was proud of that once. Then I began to see the cost. I had given my energy to keeping things stable, keeping people comfortable, keeping the house running, keeping the marriage from looking as tired as it really was. And somewhere along the way, I stopped asking what I wanted beyond survival. That realization hurt more than I expected, because rebuilding a life is not just about replacing what was lost. It is also about meeting the version of yourself you neglected for years. I had started over financially and emotionally. Now I had to start over inwardly, too. People expect healing to feel dramatic, but mine came gently. It arrived in ordinary moments, drinking coffee in a kitchen that was finally mine, buying flowers because I liked them, not because guests were coming, going to sleep without tension in my body. One Saturday morning, I opened the window, felt fresh air move through the apartment, and realized I was not waiting for anything. Not a phone call, not an apology, not a change of heart. That may not sound like much, but for me it was enormous. For the first time in years, my life was no longer arranged around someone else's moods, absences, or decisions. I was still carrying loss, yes, but I was no longer carrying confusion, and there is a kind of peace that only comes when confusion leaves the room. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply replaces survival with steadiness, one quiet day at a time. If you had asked me at 58 whether I could begin again, I would have said no. Not because I was weak, but because I thought starting over belonged to younger people. I thought reinvention had an age limit. I know better now. Starting over is not graceful. It is not efficient. It is not the clean, inspiring thing people like to put on greeting cards. It is painful, humbling, lonely work. But it is possible. I did not get back the years I lost. I did not get a rewritten ending. What I got was something quieter and in some ways more valuable. I got myself back. Not the young version, not the unhurt version, the wiser version, the honest one. So if you are listening to this while standing in the ruins of the life you thought would hold, hear me clearly. It is not too late. Sometimes the life you build after loss is the first one that truly belongs to you. If this story touched you, subscribe to Second Half Stories for more emotional stories about heartbreak, truth, resilience, and second chances.